You know what? As time goes by, I'm sure that this podcast might start to piss some people off. Well, it's because the more I do these episodes alone, the more the real me will start to come out. Because, I feel like I have so many thoughts and topics I want to discuss, especially about how our society functions nowadays. But let's not jump into a rant just yet. I have a tendency to be brutally honest, which, tends to land me in trouble sometimes. I mean, listen, I am not deliberately trying to provoke anyone or anything like that. I'm just someone who values honesty perhaps a bit too much. So welcome back to the podcast. Well, as you can see, I'm really trying to keep up, and stay consistent with this podcast. But let me tell you, it's not easy at all. Like finding the time to record and planning what to talk about, or who to talk to, while working a physically demanding 9-to-5 job and also trying to fit in my training, spending time with my wife and my daughter, pursuing an acting career also. I mean, it's a lot to handle. It's summer here in Sweden, and that also brings its own challenges because the days are long and the nights are short. So as a Muslim, I have to pray 5 times a day, and it's important to do them on time also. So, and the last prayer of the day is around 11 p.m. And I usually wake up around 4:45 to 5 in the morning, to go to work. So that means I usually end up missing the morning prayer anyway, which is like around 2 in the morning. So I'm usually very tired and don't have enough sleep. And, so I hope Allah forgives me and makes it easier for me in the future, inshallah. But I don't want to sound like I'm complaining because, it's just that sometimes it can feel like it's a lot. But at the end of the day, I find this lifestyle very thrilling and very exciting because it keeps me motivated to keep going, so I embrace it and just trying to make the most of it. Now, there's a question that's been on my mind for a while now, and I've been just ignoring it and running away from it for the past 3 years. But I feel like it's about time to face it now and, just really process it and hopefully find an answer to it, which is Sweden really that bad? Now, let me give you a bit of a background before I delve further into this topic. So I met my wife in the Gambia, who is Swedish and half Gambian. And we got married really, really fast, because I had to make it halal, obviously. And it was honestly one of the happiest moments in my life. Now, before getting married, I had always wanted to visit Sweden because I have family here. However, I never really considered moving here because my initial plan was for my wife to move to Gambia. And I was already preparing for that by shopping for furniture and getting ready, for that new chapter in my life. But then things changed quickly when I got my Swedish papers. And of course, at that moment, it didn't really matter to me where in the world we started our life together because I was really just thrilled to be with my partner. Now, I've lived in different places around the world and I've experienced different cultures also. I lived in the Gambia, Senegal, Saudi Arabia, and the US. But there was something different about Sweden when I arrived here. I can't really quite put my finger on it, but there was a unique vibe and energy that I felt. I didn't know much about the country also, but I had so many questions swirling in my mind. Not sure they were the right questions if I think about it now, but, they were the question that I had at that time, which is will this country help me achieve my dreams? Is this the right place for me? Or am I going to get my acting break? Well, 3 years later, I managed to get a role as an extra. But yeah, the only thing I knew for sure as a newly married person was that I wanted to be the best husband I could be for my wife. But as I settled into my life in Sweden, I found myself unsure of who to look up to or to even seek guidance from. All I seemed to hear were negative things about the country from other people, complaints about the system, about the racism and all other things. And it started to affect me, it made me just question more and more. And I didn't want to become one of those people, constantly complaining about my surroundings. I was really, really afraid of falling into that pattern. But of course, with time, I began to notice the cultural and spiritual differences between, myself and the Swedish people here. And, when it comes to the culture differences here, people are often described as independent and introverted. I mean, they value their personal space and privacy. But I think these things can initially lead to reservedness or even coldness, but I get it. Okay. The winters here can be incredibly long and depressing and dark. And I understand how that can affect people's mood and make them, want to become more independent and introverted. But however, though, once you break through that barrier, you will discover warm and genuine friendships. So with all those questions swirling in my mind, my cousin suggested a documentary for me to watch. A documentary on HBO Max. and it's called the Swedish theory of love. Personally, after watching the first 5 minutes, it was shocking to me. But at the same time, I felt a sense of relief. I was like, so this is deeply rooted in their society and system. It's their values. It's who they are. So the documentary takes a deep dive into the Swedish welfare state and how it affects people's life. It also explores the idea that relationships should be based on independence. Basically, the government, or should I say some politicians in the 70s, came together and planned a badass welfare system. I think it's the best in the world, no doubt. But unintentionally, they shook up the traditional family structure that we all know, which is family support. So here, the child won't be dependent on the parents, and the parents won't be dependent on their children, and women don't even have to stay with their partners, and the elderly can choose whether or not to live with their children. So because of that, Sweden has the highest number of people living alone, and some of them, I will say, feel pretty lonely. But hey, this is their choice, you know what I mean? So it is what it is. But anyway, the documentary just made me realize that living in a country with a stable safety net and a security, and even the strong emphasis on individuality, it does comes at a price, and loneliness becomes a byproduct. So if you haven't seen this documentary, I suggest you should go and check it out right now. Now, I understand that every culture has its own way and their unique sets of values. So hopefully I can delve into this without being disrespectful or provocative. You see, value shapes our societies and influence how we interact with one another. It's also important to explore the variations in values between different cultures. For instance, in my culture, we highly value the idea of togetherness, where we prioritize close-knit communities and strong family ties. Also, traditions and religious beliefs hold significant importance as they guide our way of life. But however, in Swedish society, things are different. Sweden is often linked with individualism and personal freedom. People here really value expressing themselves and going after their personal goals, without feeling held back by what society expects from them. But hey, look, we have to be real and consider the other side. Some people might argue that, this heavy emphasis on individualism, leads to a sense of disconnection within the community. They might say, it's all about me, myself, and I, and not enough about coming together as a group. But listen, we have to keep an open mind. There's always more than one side of the story, and that's something we always have to remember. And from an Islamic perspective, there's a verse in the Quran, Surah Al-Hujurat, chapter 49 and verse 13. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. He said, O mankind. And for people who don't know, by the way, the Quran was not only revealed for Muslims. The Quran is for all mankind. It's a manual guide for all humans and jinns. So the verse goes, O mankind, indeed we have created you from male and female, and made you peoples and tribes that you may know one another. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous of you. Indeed, Allah is knowing and acquainted. So this verse tells us that Allah intentionally made people different from one another. It reminds us to respect and value diversity, to live together peacefully and be good people no matter where we come from. It also encourages us to learn and understand and show empathy when we interact with people from different cultures and different backgrounds, So basically, our differences are part of Allah's beautiful creation. I'm guessing some people might be like, okay, where is he going with this? But I simply want to focus on positivity and avoid letting negativity impact my life. In a world where it's difficult to change their societal system or their core beliefs, I just prefer to take control, and find ways to accept where I am in my life. Because otherwise, why am I here? Why are any of us here? For instance, my daughter will be part of this place forever. So I want to pave the way for her. And if I'm not content with where she comes from, how can she understand, positivity? How can she understand diversity and multiculturalism? That's why I think it's actually, I believe it's essential to be grateful and avoid constant complaining and the negative thinking, and I just come to realize that if we are ungrateful and always find something to complain about, God will give us more reasons to complain. But however, if we show gratitude, God may bless us with more things to be grateful for. I recently just read a study conducted at some university. I forgot the name, but it's called Gratitude Study for Depressed People. So they had people write down 10 things they were grateful for every day for a month. And over time, people's depression began to lift. So I think there are so many blessings around us for us to be grateful for. Obviously, every place in the world naturally has its advantages and disadvantages. And from my own personal experience, as I mentioned earlier, the welfare system in this place is simply the best in the world. I mean, the safety net it provides has had a profound impact on my life. Because I remember when I hit a wall in my life, like this place gave me a second chance to start over again. It gave me a second chance in life, and it granted me the opportunity to go back to school and acquire some knowledge, which is, I think truly one of the greatest gifts somebody can receive, and it's now my responsibility to make sure that I don't mess up and I don't squander this opportunity, so overall, this place has improved me as a person, and it made me a better son, and my mother, I think, has become incredibly proud of the person I've become, alhamdulillah, and I'm grateful for that. It also made me a better husband, or at least I like to think so. And now, obviously, as a father to my daughter, I hope to be able to fulfill the role, to the best of my ability. And I'm immensely thankful for this opportunity and the support it has provided me. And another one of those advantages of living here is the security and safety. Feeling safe is a fundamental physiological need, and Sweden excels in that. Actually, talking about security being a physiological need, episode 9 on my podcast, my guest Jibril talked about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We didn't really go too deep into it, but recently I was doing some research and I got to listen to a lecture from one of my favorite Islamic scholars called Hamza Yusuf. He's an American who converted to Islam a very long time ago, and he became one of the top 50 most influential Muslims in the world. So he actually thinks that in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that the fundamental ones are the physiological needs, as Maslow calls them. But he thinks, or in his own words, he knows that the Prophet Muhammad's, peace be upon him's hierarchy of needs are actually better. Because when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, arrived in Medina, which is a city in Saudi Arabia, the first khutbah, which means a sermon he gave, he said, "O people, spread peace." So in other words, create security in your societies. And in Sahih al-Bukhari, it's actually a hadith book collection about the stories of the Prophet, Sahih al-Bukhari, and it's also one of the most valued book in Islam after the Quran. And in that book, one of the 3 hallmarks of faith, the third one is actually spreading global peace. So as Muslims or as people, we're supposed to be spreaders of peace. Okay, and the second thing the Prophet says was feed the hungry. So you have security at the bottom of the pyramid, and the next are the physiological need. Because as Hamza Yusuf said, if you're about to eat your lunch and a lion or a bear come to attack you, you will forget your lunch. So security is the fundamental need before the physiological need. Now, I understand that there may be some, differing opinions on this matter, but it's certainly something worth thinking about. And the third thing the Prophet said was maintain kinship bonds, because, family is the foundation of a society. So as you can see, you're moving up in this hierarchy, and then he said, pray at night when people are asleep. So now you have to work on yourself, because everything in the hierarchy is there now. Your security is taken care of. Your food is taken care of. You have your family. Now you work on yourself. And then the last thing he said was, then you will enter paradise in peace. So the hierarchy starts in peace and ends with peace, right? So now this hadith, it offers a profound and fascinating insight, about the hierarchy of needs from an Islamic perspective, because it begins and ends with peace, and with security, as a foundational element. Now, on to my third and final advantage, which is embracing the routines. In my last podcast, I discussed how routines can sometimes feel like an endless cycle. But after some reflection, I've realized that not having a routine for a week or two can quickly lead me to chaos in my mind. Things become disorganized in no time. And I remember when I was living in the Gambia without having any routines or any plans about my life, like, oh my God, like my life was a complete mess. The absence of routine caused me constant stress, and a lack of structure, a lack of self-discipline. And I also had difficulties with managing time. But even here in Sweden, like there were times when I was in working and I had no routines or didn't have any plans going on. As usual, of course, the boredom kicks in and it feels like a dark cloud just hanging over my head. And I would mindlessly scroll through social media or just binge watch unnecessary shows. And, this cycle will just continue and it will keep going and just leading me to like unproductive days and a sense of dissatisfaction. Actually, I just recently watched a video from by Jordan Peterson, who is a very famous psychologist, where he talks about the importance of having a routine. He stated that no one can actually live without a routine. And he also advised for those who don't actually have one to get one going as soon as possible. Because according to him, he said without a routine, you cannot maintain a mental health, because routine helps to regulate something called circadian rhythm. I hope I said that right. Circadian rhythm, which turns basically to impact your mood, So the circadian rhythm is an internal biological clock that guides your sleep-wake cycle and other daily activities. So if you don't have a routine, get yourself one, because your brain will thank you for that. Now, I only had 2 disadvantages about living here, but I think I've come to accept the way things are, in the terms of the system and how things work here. So therefore, that is no longer a drawback for me. So that means I only have 1 disadvantage left. Now, I cannot change it, but I also don't have to fully accept it either, which is the long, dark winters. I mean, the lack of sunlight during the winter months can be very, very challenging, and it has significant impact on my mood and my energy levels. But I must admit though, I didn't realize the importance of sunlight until I moved here in Sweden. Like seriously, like the winter affected me in a very negative way. And I'm not exaggerating also when I say it really, really messed me up. I was constantly in a bad mood. I was angry all the time, and I was just not well at all. And it was really confusing also. And I remember my first summer here when my wife, she was always making plans for us to be outside and explore different places. And I always used to question her, like, have you never seen the sun before? Like, I couldn't really understand because, that I couldn't understand why everyone in Sweden becomes so happy and sociable when the sun is out. But now I understand because, whenever there's a glimpse of sun in the sky, I'm always the first one to run outside. Trust me. The winter here can be brutal, but I've been trying to find ways to cope with it. And I would recommend you to try these methods as well. And one way, which is my only way, the only way I know, is taking vitamins. Taking vitamins a month or 2 before the winter starts. And personally, I take vitamin D3, which help compensate for the lack of sunlight. I also take ashwagandha, to lower my blood pressure and calm my brain from the stress. And, to support my immune system also. And additionally, I take magnesium too at night for better sleep. So these are ways that I, deal with the long winters here. And, last winter I managed quite well, definitely. Now, living in Sweden has its advantages and disadvantages as with any other country. So it's very important to focus on the positives, and try to cultivate gratitude for the opportunities that we do have here. By embracing all the things we talked about today, I think we can lead fulfilling lives and set good and positive examples for our future generations. And remember, it's within your power to shape your life and find growth, even in the face of any challenges. So let's choose gratitude over complaints and strive to make the most of the opportunities presented to us. And that's it for this episode today. So thank you for tuning in. And if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe so you can stay updated on future episodes. So take care. Stay curious and keep striving for a better life. Goodbye.